Go. All right, welcome everyone. Happy Thursday or happy Friday. My name is Meg. I am a Power to Fly virtual host and moderator. I'm super happy to be hosting all of you today for this amazing chat, and I can't wait to get started. So let's jump in. Before we get started, I do just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. These will probably be kind of old hat if you've joined us previously, but I'll try and get through them quickly. As we go on today, as always, this session, like all of our virtual events, is about you. It's about our participants and our community and making sure that y'all get the best experience out of this as is possible. So if you would like to participate, you are more than welcome and encouraged to do so. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can turn your cameras on so that we can kind of have our community around us. You are also welcome to come off mute to ask questions, add comments, or add context if your question is one of the ones that we're addressing. If you have any kind of privacy concerns, if you do come off mute, you will show up on the live recording today. And that's whether if you have your camera on, that's what'll show up. If you don't and you have like your name display or an avatar image, that's what'll show up. So if you have any kind of privacy concerns and don't want to be on the recording for today, not a problem. You can still participate by adding questions or comments into the Zoom group chat. And if you are in deep cover and don't want anyone to know you're here, that's fine. All you have to do is send your questions or comments to me in the DMs as opposed to sending it to everyone. So just hit that little drop down menu and pick my name before you send your question or comment. I will try and raise it and keep you anonymous. Like I said, this is being recorded. So if you, if you have to drop for whatever reason, no worries. Whether you can only join us for 5 minutes, you're staying for the full 60, or you registered but couldn't make it today and you're watching this in the future, hi. Everybody that registered for today's session, no matter how long you stay, will get an email in about 1 to 2 business days, so probably next week, that will have a link to where you can go to rewatch the recording on our website. Now, if Orly says something amazing today, just mind-blowing, and you have to share it with somebody right away, awesome. You can do that by heading over to our YouTube channel. We are at Power to Fly. This session is being live streamed there, and the recording will also be available there probably within like 5 to 15 minutes of when the session ends. So please feel free to check that out. I also recommend that you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you are interested in chats like these, but want to make sure you don't miss any. That's a great way to stay updated without, worrying if you've registered for something or not. But you can always watch our videos, any of them, whether you've registered or not, on our website or on our YouTube channel. If you want to keep up with us on our other social channels, we are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Yeah, definitely keep tabs on us there. You're also welcome to take photos and videos as we go and share those to social media. Please feel free to shout us out. Again, we're at Power to Fly, or we use the hashtag Power to Fly, all one word. Yeah, so as we get going here, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce you to our amazing speaker. So before you today, we have Orly Lynn. Orly is a diversity and inclusion practitioner and head of global inclusion and diversity at Commvault, as well as being the founder and CEO of Diversity Unfiltered. Orly is responsible for the design and implementation of Commvault's very first I&D strategy. In her role, she oversees the organization's diversity training, employee engagement, diverse talent acquisition, as well as partnerships. She collaborates with fellow HR colleagues and works closely with senior leaders of the organization to weave I&D into all parts of the business. Orly advises and educates leaders and team members on the value of inclusive leadership, and she especially enjoys providing developmental tools, coaching women of all ages who are seeking new opportunities or those simply ready to pivot in their careers. So welcome, Orly. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So before we go into a little bit about Commvault, or no, let me talk to you a little bit about Commvault, and then we will touch back on you before we get to our questions for today. So one thing I want to talk to you about, obviously, since Orly is here as part of the Commvault team, is Commvault as a company. So I'm going to share a link with you in just a moment in the chat. And this is a link where you can go to check out Commvault's page on powertofly.com. Now, when you go to this page, like you see in front of you, you'll be able to find out information about the company. You can check out events that they're participating in, like today, stuff like our upcoming April mini summit that's happening from the 6th to the 9th, or a virtual job fair, all that kind of stuff. You can see what they're going to take part in, as well as checking out their open roles. Now, before you go into all of those stuff and start scrolling down, at the top of this page on the right-hand side is going to be a big pink button that says follow. If you click that button, it does two things for you. It puts you on Commvault's follow network. So it tells the Commvault team that you are especially interested in working with them. It's a very important and a very smart thing to do, especially if there's not really a role that would suit you right now or that really interests you. And it's also a great way to make sure that you stay up to date because it's going to alert you every time they post a new role. So that way you don't have to feel like you're constantly circling back to job boards that maybe never change. You can also set up job alerts in our system as well. So you can, call out companies like Commvault that you want to make sure you get alerts on, or alerts for, the kind of job you're looking for. So please take advantage of that. Like I said, I shared the link in the chat here, so definitely take a look at that, especially if what you hear today really interests you about Commvault and you want to learn more. So again, before we go into our questions, I want to talk a little bit about the principal themes that we're going to have in today's conversation. So we're going to try and cover these subjects. We want to acknowledge the power of ERGs, or employee resource groups, in case you're unfamiliar with the acronym. We're also going to talk a little bit about the best practices to build an ERG group, as well as how to create a sustainable ERG group, since obviously starting something might be a little bit easier than actually carrying it out and running with it and maintaining it. So now we've identified these principal themes both on the outset for Orly with in concert with Orly, but also looking at some of the questions that y'all submitted. So if you submitted a question prior to today's session, we combined all those into kind of an organization or a conversational format. And I hope we'll be able to get to as many as possible. But if we can't, and you want to make sure you get an answer to your question, please, please, please feel free to raise it. Throw it into the question or into the Zoom chat, or come off mute and ask your question. We want you to feel like you're getting the information that you came here for and that you can really drive today's conversation. So Orly, before we jump into the questions, sorry, last delay, can you tell us in a couple sentences why you were so keen to talk about this subject and to really, kind of open up this conversation about ERGs with our community?
That's a great question, Meg. And, I have to preface by saying that when I started in my career early on, focusing on ERGs was the thing that really set the bar for the growth of my career in diversity and inclusion. And why do I say that? Why do I believe that? I believe that ERGs, employee resource groups, are really truly at the core of your diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. They are the nucleus to this overall body of this living thing. That's your DEI or D&I strategy. Then you've got the core, that nucleus that really holds your diversity and inclusion strategy together. And without this core, which is the ERGs, that is the part that really engages and mobilizes the work that you're doing from a DEI perspective throughout the organization organically, without it necessarily having to come from the head of D&I or the head of HR. So ERGs are at the center of what we do from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And the thing that I hold near and dear, and how I was able to really grow in my career, focusing on that starting point being the ERGs.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that background with us. I think it's always helpful for people to understand, where the connection is sometimes for these things. So that way people can understand why you're such a great person to talk to about it. All right. So to get us started with the questions here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so it can just be kind of the two of us chatting. I want to talk a little bit about this question that we got that was actually really kind of interesting and helps kind of illustrate the differences maybe for people that don't know it. So this person had asked, what makes an ERG different from a social group? How would you define it?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And it's one that we continuously talk about in our organization. I think there are several groups, and organizations call their ERGs something differently across the board. There are BRGs, which are business groups. There are ERGs, which are employee resource groups. There are affinity groups. There are networks. And it all depends, one, on how the organization is defining what those groups mean and what they are there to do, the purpose they're there to serve. And two, there's a difference between wanting to run a group in your organization that really taps into the overall strategy of your human resources, i.e. your business strategy. And then there are those that are just affinity groups, equally important, equally as necessary in an organization's D&I ecosystem, but they serve a slightly different purpose. And this is how I determine them. From the strategy that I have created at our organizations, BRGs/ERGs are employee resource groups that are led by our employees. They are volunteer-led, employee-led groups who aim to foster a certain level of inclusive workplace that is aligned to the organization, that is aligned to the organization's strategy. We have allies who are also invited into this, and that's where you tap into your senior folks, your mid-level manager folks, to be able to drive and be champions of these groups. Now, ERGs are so important in that they help drive the kind of change and the kind of opportunity through your customers that some other groups, for example, affinity groups wouldn't do. So for example, I would say that an affinity group or a network would be a parents group, right? So an ERG and a BRG would be those who are focusing on the underrepresented minorities of an organization, those that we want to ensure we are retaining, attracting, developing, mentoring, that we are engaging with our customers internally and externally, and that also help with ensuring that from a community perspective, a philanthropic perspective, and a sustainable perspective, we are touching all four of those pillars. So my organization, what we have done is I have embedded a structure where we have those four pillars, and that's what consists of an ERG. A network or an affinity group wouldn't necessarily have to be the kind that is retaining or developing or mentoring, right? Parents groups or a green team wouldn't necessarily do those things, right? They're not of the underrepresented minority groups that we want to help elevate and bring to the forefront from a strategy perspective to increase that population or to change the mindset of what that population is or isn't doing in your organization. These other groups are networks, and they're just as important, equally important, but what they're doing is they are engaging your organization, they are engaging with your community, and they are also engaging with your stakeholders. So stakeholders want to know so much about what are our organizations doing from, say, a sustainability perspective or a community and philanthropy. How are we giving back? How are we connecting with the communities that we serve? So equally important, but they have slightly different agendas. And it's really nice when we have a great sort of representation of how we represent people, which is what an ERG, BRG would do, and then how we represent causes, right? And they both blend, and you have to look at them sort of as a Venn diagram, and how do they come together? And how do they equally serve the purpose of mobilizing and championing inclusion and diversity at your organization?
Thank you for that, because I've never heard that broken down quite so well before, especially like in detail. I feel like a lot of times when people try and discern the difference, they just think, well, you know, an affinity group is kind of, like you said, like more like a social kind of thing. And, you know, people that work at the company that like all have kids or something can kind of get together, and it's like support, but more like from, you know, like employee to employee, and less.
And they serve those purposes too, Meg. They
Yeah.
do serve those purposes. They are there to help create a space in your organization for people to feel like they've got a place where they can gather with other folks who are like-minded, who are all parents, who are all probably in a stage or a place in their lives where they want to connect internally in their organizations with people who are probably in the same sort of sphere in terms of life, right? And I think it's super important for us to understand that that's what inclusion and diversity does. We bring a blend and we marry that work and that life experience. And now more than ever, where over 85% of organizations are all working remotely, right? So there is this collide of life and work, and there isn't this balance, there's this integration. And how do we integrate it and create some level of balance, if you will, right? And so ERGs still tend to do that. And even while remote, we have found that our ERGs have been super, super successful at allowing folks to come to a place where they can talk, where they can innovate, where they can share experiences, where they can, you know, maybe let down their hair a little bit and say, hey, I'm working 12 hours a day. When I come to these ERG meetings, they allow me to be me. They allow me to think about how this agenda that I am passionate about is going to help change the facet of the work I do in this organization.
I love that. We also have, so we have a question coming up in the chat here. Emily is asking if you have a Venn diagram of the ERG, ERO, affinity group differences. She says she'd love to see this visual to display to the team. So even if that's not extant as far as now, please remember you could always review this recording and kind of take your notes as you go, which is also kind of a nice way to view this, view with us now and kind of really be in the moment. And then if you want to take notes, you can, but like you don't have to because you can always refer back to this later. So yeah.
No, and I've been doing that. I'll forward that over to you, Meg. I'll actually forward to you my structure, the structure that I helped develop to keep our organization from a BRG, ERG perspective. And then we take parts of those to also integrate our networks and our affinity groups, because they all do similar work in that they're there to change the facet of the organization from an employee engagement perspective. And if we don't have our employees engaging in these, we're not creating the kind of opportunities that an organization needs to have in order to change mindset, in order to change some of the things that we're calling at the moment, systemic barriers. So ERGs play a very vital point in these.
Anything else that you'd like to like us to include in the rewatch link, we can always attach that to the email. So I'll make sure to follow up with you on that.
Sounds good.
Okay, so to take a look at some of the other, kind of really related questions, this person wanted to know, what should the main objectives of an ERG be? So we talked about that a little bit, but let's, instead of just the comparison, let's focus just on the ERG. What are the things that you should really be focused on, or that the ERG should be focused on?
Yep. So I think there are categories from a underrepresented minority groups inside of an organization, specifically in the United States, and of course, even abroad, globally, right? But when we think about our companies that are headquartered in the US, right? There are underrepresented minority groups that we have got to be able to ensure we create space and opportunity to have those voices championed. And that would be your Black professional, your Latinx professional, or multicultural. So at our organization, we started with a multicultural ERG versus a Black and Latinx and Asian, right? We wanted to really focus on how do we create a blend of all of these wonderful ethnic groups together. And then once we begin to see where the mobilization is happening and where the attention and focus is, we'll create a group that not only is focusing on how we move the Black agenda or the Latinx agenda or the Asian agenda, but how we tie it to our strategy, i.e. the organization strategy, and also how we make our executives accountable for it, right? Which we've already started in that process, but we did it in a way that is collective for us. And we're also a smaller organization. So we didn't want to have all of these one-off groups with smaller groups of people. We wanted to bring those smaller groups together to help mobilize and talk about that change that we want to make systemically from an all-encompassing group. But I think ERGs are really there to exist and provide a level of support to help personal or career development and to create a space, again, of engaging employees to bring their full selves to work. And that's why I call that earlier the nucleus of your DEI strategy. This is where we begin to really gather, what are people thinking? How are they feeling? What are they saying about your organization's journey in diversity and inclusion? And how do we achieve that? In order for us to achieve that and to listen and to learn and to have people championing it, because it really shouldn't just fall under the auspice of the head of diversity or the head of HR. It should really be an all-encompassing, from top down, bottoms up approach to how the journey of DEI evolves in your organization. And ERGs are at the key center of that.
I love that. You're right. It definitely needs to be more of a holistic thing. It can't just come, from top down or bottom up. It really needs to be that, idea happening in concert. All All right. So let's say you've made the decision to, try and create this ERG, or at least you've identified that there's a need for this. What are some hurdles that you might encounter creating an ERG? And just to add a little bit of maybe added depth here, are there different hurdles that you can expect if you are, let's say, part of HR versus if you are just like a single employee of the company?
Yeah, I think so. Here's one challenge. If your organization does not have any ERGs or any formal ERGs, right? Because some organizations may have groups from a grassroots level working on the gender initiative, working on the LGBTQ initiative. Oh, and that was another thing that I probably should have mentioned. Another purpose that those serve from an ERG perspective is that we should really, when thinking about starting an ERG, you want to make sure that you are starting with those underrepresented groups. And I think I was talking about that earlier. And that would be either your multicultural, or as I broke them down earlier, your LGBTQ plus and allies. That's what we call them at Commvault. Veterans, we call that group Valor. And then abilities, which is our newest ERG, and that focuses on disabilities. And we want to take that name away from that negative connotation of disability, but focus on the abilities that people bring who are disabled, right? So let's not focus on their disability. Let's focus on what they bring as top talent in a dimension that already kind of pinpoints them as not having, the kind of opportunities that most of us would have. So that's first. And then there is the just overall, how do we start one? How do we create one? And if your organization doesn't have one, so if your HR organization or your HR division hasn't already started some, but you've got some groups that are formalizing together from a grassroots perspective, you want to be able to tie those to the business. And you want to garner attention from those who have political clout in the organization. So if you can't get through to HR, or HR just saying, we just don't have the bandwidth to do that right now, or we're smaller, or we're not quite sure that's going to fit our model, then you want to find someone who is, say you want to start one for women. You want to find the person in your organization who is really committed about the gender initiative. And don't be completely like blindsided by the fact that you think this would have to be a woman. This could many times be a man. This could be a man who is an ally. And I believe, and I say this all the time, and I say this to people every time I get a chance, your middle-aged white male, you've got to bring them in as your ally in the diversity and inclusion journey of your organization. And you'd be surprised how they have just been sitting in the background, right? They're the ones making all these major decisions, but they've been sitting in the background, feeling a little alienated and a little like they're not quite sure what they should say. Hey, I'm all for this, but I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to jump in here and look like I'm trying to say it because I'm trying to gain some brownie points or checking a mark. But if you bring them in, if you share the importance of having their input, and you get a sense of who really has passion behind a particular strand of diversity, you'd be surprised. Those would be the first people who would step up and say, I'll help you. And you know what? I'll even provide some funding from my P&L to help you get started. And so that's how it happened at Commvault. We started, before I even got there, we started our women in technology ERG, and they started from a grassroots level, and they garnered attention from the head of HR, and they garnered attention from the CEO. And they really focused on that, but there was really no operational structure. When I came in, I embedded that operational structure with 4 pillars that I talked about earlier. And then I actually gave them titles. So everyone who is in an ERG and leads an ERG has a title. They are either co-chairs, chief of staffs, or, we've got an entire hierarchy. And then we have our executive sponsors who are people who report to the CEO directly. So accountability is a big piece. And I know that's probably a question you're going to ask me later, and I probably jumped ahead of time here, but it's important to really find those people who are champions, who you would never think would be champions, and they will help you create these opportunities in the organization. And there's something in it for them, because once the organization begins to see that they are championing and they are people who have political clout in your organization, others will begin to pay attention and others will begin to want to join the band. the bandwagon, right? And that's where you begin to create the kind of trickle down effect, if you will, of folks really saying, oh, hey, we've got something here. Wait a second. I love this. So really and truly, it's those in your organization who have the political coverage to provide you the kind of airspace to create and start embedding what would be your ERG groups or your networks.
Okay, awesome. I don't know that
I know that was a lot.
Well, it was a lot, but it was really helpful. So thank you so much for kind of like breaking that all down. All right, so let's talk now about. I'm gonna switch the order of some of these two of these questions. This person had asked, how can I get employees engaged so that having to maintain an ERG doesn't become a second job? And I'd also like to talk a little bit about, kind of that second job idea, because Keisha, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, had asked in the chat earlier, are employees compensated who either participate in ERGs or head up the ERGs or anything like that? So let's talk a little bit about that employee involvement and maybe what that looks like.
Okay, so let me address question one. Question one is, how do we balance that, right? So when I started the ERGs at Commvault, I was very frank with our leaders. And I said, how much visibility do you want? And where do you want to take this initiative? Because I'm looking for people who are true champions of a cause. Is it going to tap into some of the, from a percentage perspective, some of the work that you're doing from a 9-to-5 perspective? Absolutely. But that percentage is really small in comparison to the work that you're doing in your role from a quote unquote 9-to-5 perspective. So I would always break it down into percentages. So I would say 10% of what you will do monthly, allocate to your ERGs. Allocate to what you want to do and how you want to mobilize this agenda or this dimension in your organization, right? So their groups, I like to call their groups organizations because they are small organizations or subgroups within an organization, right? And so I like to always have them think about their groups as businesses. What would you do if you were starting a business and it's your side gig, right? So it's like the thing that you're doing while working. You're gonna have to put some time into it. So yes, it requires time. Yes, it requires a certain level of energy and desire. And I tell people, if you don't have that energy and desire, then this perhaps having a senior leader role may not be for you within an ERG, but there are still opportunities for you to do other things within an ERG. So many events and so many initiatives are taken off and started through ERGs, and there is always a vast opportunity to join an ERG, even if it's joining an ad hoc event once a quarter and saying, hey, to the leaders of your ERG, I can't do this every day. I can't quite do what you do where you juggle, what you do in your role, and then you're an ERG leader. But I'd love to be a part of your ERG more than a member. And I'm willing to give at least, 5% of my time per quarter. So there's an opportunity to always say and come to the leaders of your ERG by saying, hey, if you're doing 4 events this year that are going to tap into those 4 pillars, I'll work on 1 this year. I can't give a whole lot, but I'll work on 1. And as I begin to understand how to weave that into what I do from a 9-to-5 perspective and what the ERG is going to expect of me, then maybe next year I can work on 2 different pillars and I can help in a work stream, right? You start small. If you can't sit at a, being a co-chair or being a chief of staff, I would definitely say start smaller. Folks who want to sit in the larger roles within an ERG are normally those that have either had a really successful opportunity at mobilizing a project in the organization, and folks know them, and they are rising stars, and they are looking for opportunities to be known, and they are looking for opportunities to do things cross-functionally outside of their proverbial 9-to-5 roles, right? And then there are those who don't have that, who are rising stars, but don't have the visibility, don't have that opportunity to, touch any kind of projects where a senior level person in the organization is overseeing it, right? These ERGs, the way that we've set them up in my organization is we have an executive sponsor who sits at the top and reports to our CEO. That person will work with these ERGs to not just be a figurehead, but also to sit in their meetings, their monthly or bi-monthly meetings, to discuss events, to discuss the things that would be really important for them to continue to mobilize. So now you have this C-suite person meeting with the group of ERG leaders to talk about how can I help you? How can I help you mobilize this cause? And now you're working on in a cross-functional opportunity with a C-suite level person who you probably would never have an opportunity to work with that closely, right? So there are several ways that you can do that. And I think it's talking to the leaders of your ERG and finding what that sweet spot is for you until you're able to juggle a little bit more. And who knows, over time, you'll realize, you know what, 5% just isn't enough. I could do more. We do maybe 8 events a month. How much can that like really take away from what I do in a grand scheme in a year? And what folks realize is that the opportunity to exposure, the opportunity to leverage these ERGs to have leadership growth opportunities and to have the kind of opportunity to make change in your organization, it is so vastly important that folks begin to say, hey, I want to do more. I want to join. I want to come on board. And how do I do that? So the next thing that I would do is in helping people balance that is I also bring in training for our ERGs. How do we balance being ERG leaders and how do we balance what we're doing from a 9-to-5 perspective, which is my career, and how do I bring those together? And the last thing I'm trying to do is how do we create an opportunity for our organization to say, hey, we value the work these ERG leaders are doing. So no, they're not paid. To answer the second question, they are not paid, but the visibility and the opportunity for you to be seen, known, heard, and for you to make change in your organization is so big that in and of itself pays dividends in your career. And that's what we want to do. Ultimately, I would love to tie our efforts to, your review process. So your manager says, hey, so how have you contributed to diversity and inclusion this year? Well, I have not just been a part of every ERG event, but I also on the work stream of the Women in Technology ERG. And I'm also raising my hand to be a chief of staff or a co-chair in about a year or 2 years' time. I'm part of a succession plan with my ERG to help me mobilize. How do I get to a role that's going to give me the kind of visibility that will open doors for me in my career? And it doesn't matter if it's in that organization or outside of it. It's something that you can bring to your CV, to your resume. It's something you can talk to. It's something that will actually give you clout and opportunity for others to see and know who you are and what you're passionate about.
I love that because I feel like so many times when we talk about this kind of thing, like which we've had a couple chats around this idea before, and you're right, like the idea of it being unpaid work sucks, frankly. And so, it's one of those things that it's not a great answer, but I love what you're saying of not only being realistic with yourself about like how much can you give, how much do you want to give, how much time do you actually have, are you going to reprioritize some other things in your own life or whatever, but then also kind of contrast that with the fact that it's not just like feel good points or a gold star or something. You can absolutely, like leverage these experiences, these tasks, these achievements to show either, currently here's what I'm doing. And that actually, you raise a really good point. That might even be a conversation or a sentence or question to ask during a review process. Hey, while we're talking about, my work on such and such task with my team, we should also kind of review the work that I've been doing with this group, with this ERG, since it not only benefits me and the other people in that group, but also the company. So yeah, I love the idea of opening that door, even if the connection is not already made by, maybe the review process that's currently in place.
Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question. Ooh,
yeah,
can
please
I?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, so to kind of keeping it in theme with like the circle leads, or we call our ERG circles. So we have different circles. So I'll try not to use too much jargon. Hello, everyone. My name's Emily. I'm from Duo Security, or also Cisco systems. So we just recently relaunched our circles, and some of our volunteers are struggling with imposter syndrome and requesting a full-time person to run point for these groups. And just kind of, I think that the idea behind, we're all kind of confused because we're all like, we have the circles relaunched, but we don't know what to do next steps. And I feel like folks are like unsure what to do. They're like, what do I do next? And they're here and they're like, I have this full-time job. This is too much work, but it's like, it's also what they signed up for. So it's trying to communicate the balance and setting those boundaries without like making it too formalized. So I think the imposter syndrome is real though. And I'm wondering how you coach folks through that so that they can build the confidence and give them the tools to be successful as these leaders.
That's a great question, Emily, and thank you for asking. And there was something you said that rung like a bell for me immediately, the formalization of it. But believe it or not, I think people like formality when creating groups because formality allows for you to give guidance. And what I found was that when I gave my ERGs, so for example, we already had our Women in Technology group, right? And they were having all of these events and the people who were leading the ERGs, there were tons of people doing different things, but no one really knew at the next event or the next initiative who was going to do what, because you had to go through a whole selection. Who wants to do this? Who wants to do that? When you formalize it and you create a structure, you allow people to always know how to operate. And when you know how to operate, it's easy because it allows you to, hey, so here's the operating model. This is what we're going to do. So people who are sitting in the work streams, you're going to focus on this work stream. You're going to focus on that work stream. And here are the initiatives that can come out of that. That's what the organizational structure does, right? How they operate. Then I provide my ERGs a business plan that we go through quarterly. And the business plan further breaks down everything they should do. So there is very little, these are people who have, as we talked about, very demanding roles or are super busy, don't have a whole lot of time to think about how do I make this successful. I give them the tools by formalizing it, by giving it titles, by giving them titles, and by giving them a roadmap to success so that they don't have to do this on their own. And lastly, I'm going to be bringing in now actual leadership training. We have those who sit in roles that are leadership roles, but we have many of them who are not leaders in their roles, but they're looking at this opportunity as a way to develop those leadership roles and those leadership opportunities or skills, right? And I think that when we give people a way to operate, a roadmap, a toolkit, it allows for them to just be able to not worry about how it's going to get done, but assigning and thinking about the actual initiative. What do we want to do? Now that we have the roadmap for how to do it, what do we want to do? And so think tank sessions become more about how should we talk about this? How should we do it? Is this going to be a lunch and learn? Is it going to be a global event? What time are we going to do it? Who's the right speaker? Because they've got already a roadmap in place that teaches them what they need to focus on and how many of those events they should focus on in a year. And why are those most important to the organization and how they touch the overall strategy of the organization. Then that actual business plan helps them to determine year to year or quarter to quarter rather, where they should be in their process. Then we embed a diversity and inclusion calendar in there. So each of the ERGs know which dates they should be focusing on and what kind of events do they want to bring. So you can't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily celebrate everything that's on there, but there are ways that you can mobilize, especially now in a remote world. There's so much that you can do. You can write a blog, you can put something on social media, get folks to respond, get folks to start talking about a topic. You can have a live event. You can invite a speaker or an SME to talk more about a specific topic. You can invite your leaders to talk about their experiences, right? So I created a platform in our organization called Courageous Conversations after George Floyd last year. We wanted to really start talking about those tough conversations. So we started with the Black experience, being an employee who is Black in America and at Commvault. And we had our CEO at the front and center of that conversation, and our CHRO and our executive sponsors. And we had them literally weeping literally focusing on the conversations we were having. And this was led by our ERG, that conversation. Our ERG leaders sat on there and shared their most vulnerable experiences, how they have been, how they have been, how they have experienced, bias or any kind of horrific hate, kind of behavior in their lives, whether in the workplace or outside of the workplace. And that's difficult because you think you're going to be isolated and pinpointed. No, we shouldn't do that. Don't, no. In our organization, we say, when I have these, we're coming onto this conversation with an open heart and a sound mind. And we're going to listen to the experiences and we're not going to judge. We're going to ask questions and we're going to learn, because we all come from we all have a different walk in life. And these are really and truly who sits at the center of each of my conversations is my ERG leaders or my ERG members, and then our executive sponsors or any other leaders in the organization. So I say all that to say structure, believe it or not, I think sometimes we don't want to give structure because we feel like people are going to be, oh, that's too much to do. I think structure provides an opportunity for people to feel like they have less to do. They just know the roadmap. They know that they have the toolkit. Now they can just be innovators. Now they can just go out and think and create an opportunity that hasn't been done in the organization via that tool, which is the ERG, whatever dimension that might be. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. Thank you, Emily, for that great question. That was awesome. All right, so we have only about 15 minutes left in the chat. So if you do have other questions, I know it goes so quickly. So if you have other questions, please feel free to ask them. We did have one that came up in my DMs. This person said, coming from the startup world, I've never worked for an organization that has ERGs. I've partnered with a couple others to start a women's network at my company, and we've put together some speaker topic ideas, but I'm wondering what topics have been successful at other organizations that we should consider. Maybe, or are there other types of activities that we could support or look into?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned one, Meg, imposter syndrome. That is real. More times than not, studies show that everyone, including men, suffer from imposter syndrome. But when you begin to peel that onion, it looks very differently when we see it from a gender perspective. We see that women suffer more from imposter syndrome at higher levels than men do. And when you peel that woman layer, even more so, you see that Black women, Latinx women, Asian women suffer from imposter syndrome at different levels than white women would, right? And it's important for us to be realistic about the conversations we're having. And what I would say is, talk about imposter syndrome. If you're going to bring that topic, it's going to draw attention like you wouldn't believe, but have a very thoughtful process for how you break that down, because people of different ethnicities experience imposter syndrome very differently. And I think oftentimes when we start working through that female initiative and we start that female initiative or that female ERG, what we tend to find is that the focus always is female, but it's white women. We've got to be able to bring in the ethnicity and experiences of women of color. It cannot be a one-sided dimension. It has to be an intersectional opportunity to highlight how white women, Black women, Latinx women, Asian women present in your organization, how they have different experiences, how they experience gender opportunities differently, how they experience imposter syndrome, how they experience pay equity differently. So I always like to say, let's bring in a nice melt of intersectionality wherever possible into that female conversation. So yes, imposter syndrome would be a great opportunity. Pay equity is another great topic. And then really kind of getting sincere and getting down to the real questions. How do women of different ethnic groups present in your organization? I think these are courageous conversations and necessary conversations to have, because it's not about pointing fingers, it's about bringing awareness. And a lot of what happens, especially when we start these female ERGs or these women ERGs, where they tend to be like, you see all the women coming through, right? But what you see is a huge group of women who look like themselves. And so the group is very homogenous. So we've got to be able to create a space to say, no, it's not just about white women, it's about all women in our organization, and how we encounter being women in this organization and in this country differently from one another. And having those courageous conversations will open up a door for women of all ethnicities to start raising their hand and saying, how can I be a part of this? I'm feeling included for the first time. I'm feeling seen and heard, and not being afraid of listening to the experiences of women who do not look like you. That is very important.
I absolutely love that, because you're so right. You can get so deep into, kind of starting these groups that you basically, what you're creating is an echo chamber. And it's very great to have a place where you can go and you have the support of other people who are in your situation. And that is awesome. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you also need to make sure that you're not just creating this like insular thing that only then suits you and only supports you. If you can at least, widen your impact, or widen, the resources that you're looking at, the opinions you're considering, to people that also do not look like you, that's when you get to the point of having much more intersectionality between the groups, especially like opening the group up to people that maybe don't exactly fit just your small box. Then that's where you get to that really truly inclusive and equitable place, that is kind of the goal, right? You want everyone to feel seen. You want people to feel like they can come and talk to each other. Like, that's really great.
Like they belong, because at the end of the day, everyone in an organization or everyone in the world just wants to feel like they belong. And this notion of, we're having all these conversations now about hate crimes. Look, they've been happening for many years. It didn't start with George Floyd. George Floyd just created an opportunity of people saying, we are done. This is enough, right?
Yeah,
And it
exactly.
it created a ripple effect in our civil rights movement. Now we're seeing it with xenophobia, with Asian communities being, the hate crimes that are being that are happening around the country, around the world, right? These aren't just our experiences, but we have to, or these aren't just American experiences, right? From a US perspective, they're global experiences. They're happening all over the world. And how do we create opportunities to say, I've never felt that, or that's not my experience, but how do I learn what's not my experience so that I don't do that unconsciously?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really great way to put it, right? It's raising that visibility. And you're truly, it's one of those things that people say a lot about the pandemic, right? Is that we're all in a flood, but we're not all in the same boat. So keeping it's between the George Floyd, horrible George Floyd incident, as well as, the kind of, let's talk in very small aspects, like the education inequities and shortcomings that have been highlighted, especially in America, by this pandemic. These are things that were part of a lot of people's everyday life. They were part of their experience, their lived experience for so long. And now it's coming to the attention of, sad to say, a wider white audience that is now seeing some of the problems that they did not experience. And because they didn't experience it and nobody in their circle did, they didn't consider them to be a thing, or they didn't realize it was a thing. So we're now at the point where I didn't realize is not really an excuse anymore, but it's okay to start there and just realize that's fine. I didn't realize this was a thing. How can I help, or how can I understand more about it?
Right.
All right, before we jump, Aline had a great question, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, and I did want to kind of circle back to it. She's asked, have you had any experience with launching ERGs related to neurodiversity, like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, anxiety, which has increased in awareness in recent years? I wanted to ask this because you had talked about it like an ability ERG, which is so awesome, because so much of the diversity idea is centered on visible diversity, right? And so you want to also include people that have either non-visible diversities or things that don't suit what people picture when they think of as diversity.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this. And if you're interested in this subject, we also had a really great talk on this at the last March summit. So I'm going to try and dig that one up, so that way y'all can revisit this topic. I was in it, but it was one of my favorite talks. So Orly, flash.
Yeah, no, that is a great question to kind of bring this to a close, and one that I am having a wonderful time exploring and bringing to Commvault. So that is our newest ERG. We are just about to launch it. We're still in the process of launching it. And we started it with the notion, or we thought about it with the notion of how do we bring voice, care, opportunity, and engagement to a topic that oftentimes people will shy away from and say, that's not my experience, right? And we change that negative connotation that usually comes with the word disability, right? And it's that DIS word that kind of, I'm not a part of that, that's not me, or it's dysfunctional, or it's dividing, or whatever the case might be. And we changed it to abilities. And so we're in the process now of, we just selected who our executive sponsor is going to be, who reports directly to our CEO. We are looking at who's going to be our co-chairs. We have 2 co-chairs for each of our ERGs, and we have a chief of staff. And like I said, I'll share the model with you all so that if you're thinking about how you want to start these will help give that frame and that structure that your ERG leaders will need to help them feel a little more comfortable about, oh, okay, this is okay, I can do that. Here's the structure, I can do this. I can still manage my job and yet do this on the side. But going back to that question, I, in November, hired my very first neurodiverse top talent. And we sought out this organization and created a partnership with this organization called Creative Spirits. And they focus on finding and creating opportunities for people who are neurodiverse, whether ADD, whether, on the spectrum, Down syndrome. The spectrum is so wide of how disabilities or neural disabilities or neurodiversity shows up in an individual. But what we want to focus on is, what are the skills these individuals bring to an organization? And so it gave me the very first opportunity to manage someone with neurodiversity. It taught me so many wonderful opportunities to be more thoughtful about how I give direction in my team, to be more thoughtful about what top talent looks like in an organization, and that it doesn't have to look like what we look like or how we present, because neurodiversity, or people who are neurodiverse, it's either physical or invisible, right? We can't see it, we can't pinpoint it. But when we have that interaction and that social experience, we see that there are some differences between the way that we operate and the way that someone on the spectrum would operate. But it doesn't make them less able to do or be a part of an organization. In fact, studies show that neurodiverse people, or people on the spectrum who would be sort of like, on the higher scale of the spectrum, will be able to input or output from that person in terms of the kind of work and the kind of opportunities that they'll bring to your team, innovation, creativity, which is super concerted because they are focused on getting the work done, and they are focused on seeing life experiences through a different lens than we have, right? And that's the whole notion of diversity, is how do we create a space where people who do not look like us or have a similar experience to us come together in a group and are able to innovate, are able to, create opportunities, are able to design things and go above and beyond that which we never thought would be possible. And that is the beauty that diversity brings to a team, right? And so we're starting now our abilities ERG this quarter, and we're excited for it. And this month is Diversity Month. So we've started celebrating Diversity Month by putting out a blog, and I put out a vlog as well, which is a video blog, and we share it with the organization. I do different things in the organization, from blogging to live, to, sipping chats, to, 5 o'clock, let's bring your glass of wine if you drink, or bring your sparkling water, whatever the case might be. And let's have a happy hour, and let's talk about some of the things that we don't usually get to talk about different diversity dimensions. But we're able to now bring into the fold, and I'm using my experience of having had someone in my team, and it was just a 4-month internship. Now the person has moved on to another opportunity. He is now creating a CV and an experience portfolio of the work he's done on my team. And, you know, he just graduated college, right, in the midst of like this pandemic. And the opportunity he had to work in another organization went away because the organization had completely shut down all of their internship opportunities. We were able to hire this young man, and he did an amazing job at not just creating an opportunity for himself, but also setting the tone in my team, i.e. in this organization, for us to change our mindsets around what top talent looks like and how neurodiversity represents or presents in our organization. So that's a big topic, and we're really excited for it. We even have some stuff that we started talking about neurodiversity on our website on Commvault Life. So if you guys want to check that out, I created a blog and we have some stuff up there as well. But we're also focusing at April 2nd, as a matter of fact, is I believe it's Down syndrome. No, we just had Down Syndrome Awareness Day. We've got a few other just amazing
autism today.
Autism, thank you. Autism Day. So we had a nice blog, and we actually had the gentleman that was on my team do a little something before he left, and we talked about his experience, and we talked about what it meant and how he felt being very included, and then working remotely, right? So I think many times our organizations forget that although we're working remotely, people who are neurodiverse would probably experience working remotely very differently. So it's creating the kind of changes in our organization so that managers know how to manage someone who is neurodiverse. And now we're bringing training to our hiring managers. We're selecting a small few who are able to kind of understand what we're looking for and who are interested in sort of being nominated in this pilot. And we're going to start training our hiring managers as well as our talent acquisition team for what we're looking for in top talent, which also includes top neurodiverse talent.
Orly, that is so amazing. I am, as always on like a Friday afternoon, I'm kind of like, like ready for the weekend and super excited to go out on a high note. And this is like just energized me so much. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. We had so many amazing questions that we didn't get to, both pre-submitted as well as in the chat. So Eileen, don't worry, or Eileen, don't worry, I've grabbed the ones that you had asked that we weren't able to get to. So hopefully maybe we can have Orly back for a part 2 and keep going over some of these great questions that y'all had submitted. Before we jump, I had shown this, this screen with some of the questions that you had answered for us first. So I want to share this with everybody still, but in about the minute we have left, let's talk a little bit about Commvault and maybe some of your tips for somebody who's interested in applying.
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me there?
I didn't really get that. It was coming in and out. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
Okay. No worries. Could you tell us maybe what's your favorite part about working at Commvault, or any tips for somebody that's applying?
Oh gosh, the people. And people at Commvault are just amazing. It really created a space for me to bring my full self to work, and for me to not just bring my full self, but the work that I believe in. And I was looking for an organization that wanted to truly do diversity the way that it honors people and it honors the work, so that it's not just a check the box. And that's exactly what the people at Commvault enabled me to feel. Like I could bring that entire part of who I am as a person and as a professional to this organization.
That is so great. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry we ran out of time, but I've also highlighted some of Commvault's open jobs here, so please feel free to take a look at that. And as we close out today on this Friday, I hope that y'all have a great and wonderful, safe weekend. Orly, again, thank you so much for spending time with us. This was wonderful. And thank you to all of our attendees. Y'all submitted amazing questions both before and during, and it's really one of those key elements that makes these chats so awesome. So thank you all for that. Orly, I hope to see you back soon.
Thank you. That was awesome. This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone who joined today. Really appreciate the conversation. I had so much fun. Power to Fly, bring me back whenever you want.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yeah, you're